Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Look, if you're a university student tackling Edward Albee for the first time right now, you might be feeling a little, well, lost. His dialogue kind of reads like a confusing maze, and his characters definitely do things that just defy simple logic. But seriously, don't worry. We've got you covered. Today, we're going to take all those big, complex plays and break them down into super simple, easy to understand ideas. By the end of this masterclass, you'll have a really solid grip on what he's actually trying to say. To kick things off, let's start with a really powerful thought straight from the playwright himself. Albee once said, "All my plays are about people missing the boat." I find that most people spend too much time living as if they're never going to die. Think about that for a second. It completely reveals his main goal as a writer. See, he doesn't write just to keep us entertained for a couple of hours. He writes to shake us out of our daily numbness. He basically wants to force us to wake up and actually start living. So, here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll meet Edward Albee. Second, we'll decode the theater of the absurd. Third, we'll look at the failure of communication. Fourth, we'll explore how he shatters the American dream. And finally, we'll talk about the unique music of his words. All right, let's jump right into part one, Meet Edward Albee. So who is this guy? Well, Edward Albee is considered one of America's absolute greatest dramatists. And the reason his work is so heavily studied in university courses is because it practically demands a second, closer look. He completely refused to just hand his audience neat, easy answers. Instead, he wrote these incredibly deep, challenging plays that totally rebelled against the normal, accepted way of doing things. And he had a wildly long and successful career. He literally burst onto the scene back in 1959 with a huge breakthrough play called The Zoo Story. Then he totally dominated the 1960s with absolute masterpieces, like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. But he didn't just fade away after that. No way. He kept challenging audiences for decades, even snagging a Tony Award in 2002 for a play called The Goat. He stayed totally relevant for over 40 years. Okay, if you're prepping for an exam or writing an essay on Albee, you'll definitely want to mentally pin these core themes down. His plays are constantly exploring deep isolation and alienation. He also focuses heavily on the danger of societal complacency, which basically just means people getting way too comfortable and refusing to question the world around them. You'll also see this recurring motif of a lost child pop up a lot, alongside his focus on humanity's really dangerous habit of hiding behind comfortable, fake illusions. Moving right along to part two, Theater of the Absurd. So what exactly is absurdism? When we hear the word absurd, we usually think of something silly or funny, right? But in literature, it means something entirely different. It's a genre that highlights the chaos of a meaningless world. It portrays a universe that just doesn't have a built-in purpose. The playwright is showing you this raw chaos without offering any neat, happy solutions at the end. To really get this, let's contrast it with traditional drama. In a traditional play, you get logical steps that lead to a very clear conclusion. The writer gives you answers. But in the theater of the absurd, there are no easy conclusions. A character's actions might have absolutely no meaning whatsoever. Think of it this way. A man tying his shoe might be treated as this massive, intensely dramatic event, while a literal rhinoceros walking into the room gets completely ignored. There's no perfectly wrapped up ending, which is honestly a great reflection of how confusing modern life can be. Let's roll into part three, the failure of communication. This is something we can probably all relate to today. In Albee's plays, characters are basically trapped in their own private egos. They talk and talk endlessly, but they say absolutely nothing of substance. Think about how much this resembles modern social media. People are constantly broadcasting their thoughts and talking at each other, but rarely ever understanding one another. And for Albee's characters, that lack of genuine human connection leads to this really deep, painful loneliness. Let's look at a perfect case study. Albee's play, The Zoo Story. In it, we have Jerry, who is an outcast, living in a tiny, depressing room. And then we have Peter, a guy who blindly follows all of society's rules, basically a comfortable little cog in the machine. Throughout the play, Jerry desperately tries to bridge the massive gap between his dark underworld and Peter's normal, everyday world. But because society has completely lost the ability to actually communicate, that gap just cannot be bridged. Albee does this brilliant thing with stage props to show this emptiness. Imagine this. When Jerry is describing his miserable room to Peter, he mentions having 2 picture frames, but the frames are totally empty. I want you to ask yourself, why on earth are the picture frames empty? Well, the answer Jerry gives is just an absolute emotional gut punch. He says,
I don't see why they need any explanation at all. Isn't it clear? I don't have pictures of anyone to put in them. Wow, right? Albee uses this empty frame as a metaphor to highlight the sheer, devastating isolation of his characters. They have no family, no real connections, literally no one to even put in a photograph.
That brings us to part 4, Shattering the American Dream. Back in his early career, Albee was often labeled as an angry young man, and honestly, his plays are a highly passionate attack on the pointless chase for wealth. He targets the heartlessness of a society that suddenly valued blending in and buying things over actual human connection. He basically holds up a really harsh mirror to society, forcing everyday people to see their own emptiness. So, how exactly does he expose the status quo? Well, he forces us to look at the staggering human cost of all this heartlessness. Like I mentioned earlier, he frequently uses a lost child motif to represent hollow, broken marriages. He aggressively strips away our shallow values. Critics often call Albee's worldview entropic. Now, that's just a fancy academic word that simply means a society that is slowly falling apart and running out of energy, all because its people are choosing to hide behind false, comfortable illusions. And that brings us to our final section, Part 5, The Music of Albee's Words. If you've started reading an Albee script for class, you've probably noticed that the dialogue is, well, it's pretty chaotic. It's terse, it's disjointed. Characters will literally correct each other's grammar right in the middle of a vicious, screaming fight. Now, if reading this makes you feel totally frustrated and confused, guess what? That is exactly what Albee intended. He's doing it on purpose, to trap you, the reader, in the exact same maze of frustration that his characters are stuck in. Honestly, it just brilliantly shows his control as a writer. The best advice for studying his plays is to actually think of them as musical scores. Albee is giving his actors a highly specific rhythm to follow. Those heavy silences, the dramatic pauses, the overlapping fast arguments, they are just as important as the actual English words on the page. For him, dialogue is like a musical instrument, and he uses it to smash those false societal values to pieces. As we wrap up this explainer today, let's bring it all back to Albee's core lesson. He strips away our comfortable illusions, he exposes our failure to communicate, and he traps us in these crazy mazes of dialogue for one very specific reason. He wants to ask you, are you living fully? Are you awake and aware? Or are you just numbly waiting for the end? It's a pretty provocative question, right? But it's a great one to carry into your exams and honestly, into your life. Thanks so much for joining me today.